The deafening crack of a pistol echoed through the dusty streets of Copper Creek as Madeline Rose flinched, her slender fingers clutching the edge of her tattered shawl. It wasn't the first time gunfire had punctuated her arrival in a new town, but she hoped desperately it would be the last. The year was 1876, and the promise of a new life in the West had brought her nothing but heartache. "Get that girl out of here," shouted the saloon owner, his weathered face contorting with disgust as he pointed a thick finger at Madeline. "Nothing but trouble follows her like flies on a dead horse." Madeline's cheeks burned with shame as she clutched her single carpet bag, containing everything she owned in the world. At 22, she had already endured more hardship than most faced in a lifetime. Orphaned at 16, forced into a loveless engagement that ended in scandal, and now drifting from town to town seeking work that never seemed to materialize. "I only need a job, sir," she said softly, her voice barely audible above the raucous piano music spilling from the saloon. "I can clean, cook, or serve. I'm not afraid of hard work." The saloon owner barked a harsh laugh. "Hard work? Is that what you call it? We've heard about you, Miss Rose, the girl who burned down the general store in Willow Creek, the one who brought typhoid to Silver Springs, the jinx who—" "That's not true," Madeline protested, but her voice faltered. Rumors had a way of traveling faster than stagecoaches in these parts. "She's hopeless," declared a woman in a gaudy purple dress peering through the saloon doors. "Cursed, they say." "Then she's my hope." The deep voice cut through the murmurs of the gathering crowd like a knife through butter. Madeline turned to see a tall man dismounting from a magnificent chestnut stallion. Dust clung to his well-worn leather chaps, and his face was partially obscured by the brim of his hat, but she could make out a strong jaw shadowed with several days' growth of beard. "Yates Abernathy," the saloon-keeper said with obvious respect in his voice. "What business do you have with this woman?" The man Yates stepped forward, removing his hat to reveal sun-streaked hair and eyes the color of a summer sky. "My ranch needs help. Mrs. Peterson just left us to care for her ailing mother back east." He looked directly at Madeline, his gaze steady. "I need someone who can cook for the hands and keep the house in order." Madeline's heart raced. A job offer was the last thing she expected, especially from a man who appeared to be a person of significance in this town. "You don't want her," insisted the woman in purple. "They run her out of 3 towns already. Bad luck follows that girl like a shadow." Yates regarded Madeline thoughtfully. "I don't believe in luck, madam. Only choices and consequences." He turned to Madeline. "Can you cook?" "Yes, sir," she answered, straightening her spine despite her exhaustion. "My mother taught me, and I cooked for the Wilsons in Silverton for nearly a year." "Before they threw you out," someone in the crowd muttered. Yates ignored the comment. "The pay is $15 a month plus room and board. Sundays off unless there's a special need. It's 7 miles to the ranch, so if you accept, we should leave now to arrive before dark." Madeline blinked in disbelief. The offer was generous, far more than she had hoped for. "I accept, Mr. Abernathy. Gladly." The crowd's disapproving murmurs grew louder, but Yates silenced them with a stern look. "My business is my own." He took her carpet bag without asking and secured it to his saddle before offering her a hand up. Madeline hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. His palm was calloused but warm, and he lifted her onto the horse with surprising gentleness. She settled behind him, unsure where to place her hands. "You'll want to hold on," he advised as he mounted in front of her. "Storm here has a spirited trot." Tentatively, she placed her hands at his waist, feeling the solid strength of him beneath her fingers. As they rode away from town, the whispers faded behind them. Madeline tried to ignore the knot of anxiety in her stomach. She'd had promising starts before, only to have everything crumble around her. "Thank you, Mr. Abernathy," she said, raising her voice to be heard over the rhythmic hoofbeats. "Most wouldn't have given me a chance." "Most people are fools," he replied simply. "And call me Yates. We don't stand on ceremony at the AA. "The AA? "My ranch, named by my father when he claimed the land 20 years ago. Abernathy and Abernathy, him and me. Though it's just me now." There was a wealth of unspoken history in those words, but Madeline knew better than to pry. Everyone had their stories out here, many of them marked by loss. "I'm sorry," she offered instead. "Don't be. He lived the life he chose." Yates glanced back at her. "What about you, Miss Rose? What brings you to Copper Creek with nothing but a carpetbag and a cloud of rumors?" Madeline tensed. "Those rumors aren't true. I didn't burn anything down, and I certainly didn't bring disease to Silver Springs." "I didn't figure you did." His tone was matter of fact. "But something's driven you here all the same." She considered how much to reveal. "I'm seeking a fresh start. My parents died when I was 16. Since then, I've been on my own, trying to make my way. It hasn't always been smooth." "The West isn't kind to lone women," Yates acknowledged, "but the AA is a decent place. The men respect my rules, and Mrs. Peterson ran a tight household before me. You'll have your own room off the kitchen, and as long as you work hard and stay honest with me, we'll get along fine." As they crested a hill, Madeline gasped at the vista spread before them. Golden grasslands rolled away toward distant mountains tinged purple in the late afternoon light. A creek wound like a silver ribbon through the valley, and nestled beside it stood a substantial ranch house with several outbuildings and corrals. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's home," Yates replied, and she could hear the pride in his voice. As they approached the ranch, Madeline could see men working in the corrals and fields. A few looked up and waved at Yates, their curious gazes lingering on Madeline. They rode up to the main house, a solid 2-story structure built of logs with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Yates dismounted and reached up to help Madeline down, his hands firm on her waist. "You're trembling," he observed quietly. "I just want to do well here," she admitted. "I need this to work." He studied her face for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Then we want the same thing, Miss Rose. Come on, I'll show you around." The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable, if somewhat Spartan. The main floor consisted of a large kitchen with a massive wood-burning stove, a dining room with a long table that could seat at least 15, and a sitting area with worn but clean furniture. Yates showed her to a small but private room off the kitchen, just as he'd promised. "Mrs. Peterson kept everything organized her own way," he explained, gesturing to the kitchen. "You're welcome to rearrange as you see fit, but I'll warn you the men get used to routine." "How many men are there?" Madeline asked, suddenly realizing she would be cooking for an unknown number. "8 hands full-time, plus me and my foreman, Jackson. Sometimes we hire extra help during branding or roundup." He pointed to a large ledger on a shelf. "Mrs. Peterson kept records of meals, supplies, and accounts there. Might help you get your bearings." Madeline nodded, already feeling overwhelmed but determined not to show it. "Hungry?" Yates asked unexpectedly. "You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days." She started to deny it out of habit, but her stomach betrayed her with an audible growl. A flush crept up her neck. "Perhaps a little." To her surprise, Yates chuckled a warm, rich sound that transformed his serious face. "Let's remedy that. I'm no chef, but I can manage bacon and eggs." He moved around the kitchen with unexpected efficiency, stoking the stove and retrieving food from a large icebox. As he worked, Madeline took the opportunity to study him more carefully. Yates Abernathy was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so, with the lean, muscular build of a man who worked alongside his hands rather than merely directing them. His movements were economical, nothing wasted, and though his clothes were utilitarian, they were of good quality. "You don't have to cook for me," she said finally. "It should be the other way around." He cracked eggs into a cast-iron pan. "You start your duties tomorrow. Tonight, you're still a guest." The simple kindness nearly undid her. After months of suspicion and rejection, it felt foreign. They ate at the kitchen table, the food simple but satisfying. Yates explained the rhythm of ranch life: breakfast at dawn, dinner at noon when the men came in from morning work, and supper in the evening. "Sundays are quieter," he said, "essential chores only, and many of the men ride into town. That'll be your day to rest or do as you please, though you're welcome to join us for church if you're inclined." I would like that, Madeline said softly. It's been some time since I attended services. As darkness fell, lamps were lit, and Madeline heard the sound of men's voices approaching the house. Anxiety fluttered in her chest again. The crew, Yates explained, rising from the table. I'll introduce you, then let you get settled. The kitchen door swung open, and men filed in, their conversation dying as they spotted Madeline. They were a diverse group, some young, some weathered by years under the sun, all regarding her with undisguised curiosity. Men, this is Miss Madeline Rose, Yates announced. She's taking over for Mrs. Peterson. I expect you to show her the same respect. A tall man with graying temples stepped forward. Jackson Miller, madam. I'm the foreman here. Welcome to the AA. One by one, the others introduced themselves. Pedro, Timothy, the brothers Eli and Ezra, young Charlie who couldn't be more than 19, taciturn Frank, and a man called Doc, who despite his nickname, admitted he was no physician. Just patched up enough men and horses that the name stuck, he explained with a crooked smile. They were polite, if reserved, and Madeline sensed they were taking her measure just as she was taking theirs. Miss Rose has had a long journey, Yates said finally. You'll have plenty of time to get acquainted over breakfast tomorrow. The men filtered out to their bunkhouse, and Yates turned to Madeline. Get some rest. Morning comes early here. Alone in her small room, Madeline unpacked her meager belongings, 2 dresses besides the one she wore. A nightgown, undergarments, a hairbrush, and a small wooden box containing her only treasures, her mother's locket, a faded family photograph, and a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. As she changed into her nightgown, she caught a glimpse of herself in the small mirror hanging on the wall. Her brown hair hung in limp waves past her shoulders, and shadows darkened the skin beneath her hazel eyes. She looked exhausted, thin, but there was something else there, too. A flicker of hope she hadn't seen in a long time. Don't get comfortable, she warned her reflection. This could end like all the others. But as she slipped between clean sheets on a real bed, a luxury she hadn't enjoyed in weeks, Madeline couldn't help but feel that perhaps, just perhaps, the AA might be different. The first rays of dawn were barely breaking the horizon when Madeline awoke to the sound of movement in the kitchen. For a disorienting moment, she didn't remember where she was, but then the events of the previous day came rushing back. She dressed quickly in her cleanest dress of faded blue calico and pinned her hair in a simple bun before taking a deep breath and opening her door. Yates stood at the stove, coffee pot in hand. He looked up when she entered, surprise briefly crossing his features. You're up early, he remarked. Coffee? Yes, please. She accepted the mug he offered, wrapping her fingers around its warmth. I should be the one making this. Habit, he explained with a shrug. I'm usually first up. Madeline surveyed the kitchen, mentally planning breakfast. What do the men typically eat in the morning? Mrs. Peterson usually made flapjacks or biscuits and gravy, sometimes eggs and bacon when supplies allowed. He gestured toward the pantry. We're well stocked. Supply wagon came through last week. Nodding, Madeline set her coffee aside and tied on an apron she found hanging by the stove. I'll make biscuits then, with gravy and eggs. Is that suitable? More than suitable. Yates watched her for a moment as she began gathering ingredients. Do you need help finding anything? I'll manage, she assured him, already feeling more confident in the familiar routine of cooking. This kitchen is well organized. He nodded and moved toward the door. I'll see to the horses. Men will be in within the hour. Once alone, Madeline worked quickly, finding comfort in the familiar tasks. By the time heavy footsteps announced the arrival of the ranch hands, she had platters of golden biscuits, a pot of creamy gravy studded with sausage, and scrambled eggs waiting on the table. Something smells mighty fine, declared Jackson as he entered, the other men filing in behind him. They seated themselves around the table with surprisingly little fanfare, though Madeline noticed they waited for Yates to enter and take his place at the head before anyone reached for food. Breakfast was a mostly silent affair. The men focused on eating after offering brief thanks for the meal. Madeline busied herself keeping coffee cups filled and bringing more food as platters emptied. She noticed Yates watching her occasionally, his expression thoughtful. As the men finished and headed out to their day's work, they each thanked her, some with just a nod, others with words of appreciation for the meal. When only Yates remained, he lingered over his coffee. "You cook well," he said simply. "Thank you." She began clearing the table. "Will you tell me more about the ranch? It would help me better understand what's needed." Yates leaned back in his chair. "The AA runs about 2,000 head of cattle across 15,000 acres. We also breed and train horses. That's my particular interest. My father was a cattleman through and through, but I always preferred working with horses. It must be a lot to manage." "It is, but I have good men. Jackson's been foreman since my father's time, knows this land better than anyone. The others have their strengths too." He explained how spring meant calving and preparing for the summer grazing season, while fall brought roundup and preparing stock for winter. There was always work to be done, fences to mend, horses to train, predators to ward off. "And your role in all this is cooking, keeping the house and managing supplies," he concluded. "Mrs. Peterson also tended a kitchen garden out back, though it's gone a bit wild since she left." Madeline nodded, already mentally planning how to restore the garden. "I noticed the ledger you mentioned. I'll look through it today to get a better understanding of what's needed." "Good." Yates stood, reaching for his hat. "I'll be working with the new horses in the south pasture today if you need anything. Otherwise, take time to settle in and learn your way around." After he left, Madeline spent the morning exploring the house and taking inventory of supplies. The pantry was indeed well stocked with flour, sugar, coffee, and preserved goods. A smokehouse behind the main house contained hams and bacon, and a root cellar held potatoes, onions, and apples. By the time noon approached, she had prepared a hearty beef stew with dumplings and fresh bread. The men came in from their morning work, their initial reserve slightly diminished as they complimented her cooking. Young Charlie, who couldn't be more than 19, seemed particularly appreciative. "Miss Rose, this stew reminds me of my mama's," he said with a shy smile. "Haven't had dumplings like this since I left home." "Where is home, Charlie?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Missouri, madam. Left 2 years back to seek my fortune." He grinned. "Still seeking?" This prompted laughter from the others and sparked conversation about their own origins. Madeline learned that the brothers Eli and Ezra had come west from Pennsylvania after the war. Pedro had been born in New Mexico when it was still Mexican territory, and Doc had once been a medical student in Boston before life took a different turn, as he put it. Only Frank remained silent, eating efficiently and departing as soon as he finished. Madeline noticed Yates watching the taciturn cowboy with a slight frown. "Don't mind Frank," Jackson told her when he noticed her watching. "He doesn't talk much to anyone." After the men returned to work, Madeline tidied the kitchen and began preparations for supper. She also ventured out to examine the neglected garden, finding several hardy herbs still growing among the weeds. With time and care, she could have it producing vegetables by summer. The days began to develop a rhythm. Madeline rose before dawn to start breakfast, spent mornings baking bread or preparing preserves, made dinner for midday, then focused on cleaning and mending in the afternoons before preparing supper. The men gradually warmed to her presence, sharing stories during meals and occasionally bringing her small tokens: a wildflower from Charlie, fresh trout from Doc's fishing expedition, a mended wooden spoon that Eli had carved a simple pattern into. Only Frank remained distant, though he was never unkind. He simply kept to himself, speaking only when necessary. Madeline noticed he often worked alone, taking the most distant fence lines or watching the herd in the farthest pastures. "Frank's had a harder road than most," Yates explained when she finally asked about him one evening as they sat on the porch after supper. This had become an unexpected routine, a few quiet moments together as twilight settled over the ranch. "Lost his wife and daughter to influenza 5 years back. He doesn't let people get close anymore." Madeline's heart ached for the silent cowboy. "That's terrible." "It is," Yates agreed quietly. "But we all carry something out here. The West doesn't attract those with easy lives behind them." His words made her wonder again about his own story. In the 2 weeks she'd been at the AA, Yates had revealed little about himself beyond his daily work and plans for the ranch. "What about you?" she asked carefully. "What brought you to ranching?" Yates was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. "My father," he finally said. "He had a vision of building something lasting. Came out here when I was just 10, dragging me and my mother along. It was hard country then, still is, in many ways, but he was determined." "And your mother?" A shadow crossed his face. "She died that first winter. Pneumonia." "I'm sorry," Madeline said softly, understanding better his self-sufficiency, his reserved nature. "It must have been difficult growing up out here without her." "It was," he acknowledged, "but my father taught me everything I needed to know about surviving, about building something worthwhile." He gestured toward the expanse of the ranch. "This land, it gets in your blood, becomes part of you." Madeline could understand that feeling. Even in her short time at the AA, she'd grown to appreciate the stark beauty of the landscape, the way the light changed throughout the day, painting the grasslands gold at dawn and crimson at sunset. "Your cooking's been good for morale," Yates said, changing the subject. "The men have noticed." "I'm glad," she replied, warmed by the compliment. "They work so hard. Good food is the least they deserve." Yates studied her for a moment, his blue eyes reflecting the dying light. "You've settled in well. Better than I expected, given what the folks in town said." Madeline tensed slightly. "And what do you think of those rumors now?" "I think people are quick to blame and slow to understand," he said simply. "Whatever happened before, you've proven yourself capable here." His words eased something in her chest that had been tight for months. "Thank you for giving me a chance when others wouldn't." "Everyone deserves at least one chance," Yates replied. "Most deserve more than that." In that moment, watching his profile against the darkening sky, Madeline felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with anxiety or fear. Yates Abernathy was unlike any man she'd ever known, strong but not cruel, reserved but not cold. He carried his responsibilities with a quiet dignity that she found increasingly compelling. She pushed the feeling aside. Developing an attachment to her employer would be foolish. She was here to work, to build a new reputation, to save enough money to perhaps someday have a place of her own. Romance had no place in those plans. Still, as they sat in companionable silence watching the first stars appear, Madeline couldn't help but feel that for the first time in years, she might have found somewhere she belonged. Spring progressed into early summer, bringing longer days and the constant activity of ranch life. Madeline settled fully into her role, expanding her duties to include tending the kitchen garden, which now flourished with herbs, lettuce, and early vegetables. She had also taken on mending the men's clothes, a task they greatly appreciated, as most were hopeless with a needle. One warm June afternoon, as she sat on the porch darning socks, she spotted a cloud of dust approaching from the direction of town. Shading her eyes, she made out a wagon with 2 figures aboard. Jackson, who was repairing a bridle nearby, looked up with a frown. "We're not expecting supplies today." The wagon drew closer, and Madeline recognized Sheriff Thomas from Copper Creek driving, with another man beside him whom she didn't know. Something about their purposeful approach made her stomach tighten with apprehension. "Is Yates here?" she asked Jackson. "South pasture with Doc. Breaking that new stallion," the foreman replied, setting aside his work. "Want me to fetch him?" "Please," she said, her unease growing as the wagon pulled up to the house. Sheriff Thomas nodded to her as he stepped down. "Miss Rose, need to speak with Mr. Abernathy." "He's being summoned," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "May I ask what this is about?" The second man, dressed in an ill-fitting suit, studied her with narrowed eyes. "You're the woman from back east, ain't you? The one they run out of Silver Springs?" Madeline straightened her spine. "I left Silver Springs of my own accord, sir." "And you are?" "Arnold Prescott," the man said with an air of importance. "I publish the Copper Creek Gazette, and I've received some mighty interesting correspondence about you, Miss Rose." Before she could respond, the sound of hoofbeats announced Yates's arrival. He dismounted in one fluid motion, his expression guarded as he took in the visitors. "Sheriff, Mr. Prescott." What brings you out to the Double A? Sheriff Thomas removed his hat. Got some questions that need answering, Yates, about your housekeeper here. Yates's eyes flickered to Madeline before returning to the sheriff. What kind of questions? Prescott stepped forward, pulling a folded paper from his coat. Got a telegram from the sheriff in Silver Springs. Says Miss Rose here was suspected of theft before she left town. Silver candlesticks gone missing from the Peterson household where she worked. Madeline felt the blood drain from her face. That's a lie. I never stole anything in my life. The Petersons seem to think otherwise, Prescott continued, clearly enjoying his role. And there's talk of other incidents before that. A fire in Willow Creek. I had nothing to do with that fire, Madeline interrupted, her voice shaking with anger and fear. It was a lightning strike during a storm. The whole town saw it. Yates's voice cut through the tension like a blade. What exactly are you here for, Sheriff? To arrest Miss Rose. On what charges? Sheriff Thomas had the grace to look uncomfortable. No charges as such. Silver Springs Sheriff just asked me to question her, and he hesitated, glancing at Prescott. And to warn you, Prescott finished eagerly, about the kind of woman you've taken in. There's talk she brings bad luck wherever she goes. That fire, an outbreak of typhoid. That's enough. Yates's tone left no room for argument. Miss Rose has worked at the Double A for nearly 2 months without incident. She's proven herself honest and hard-working. I won't have her character assassinated on my property based on rumors and gossip. Prescott's face reddened. Now see here, Abernathy. No, you see here. Yates stepped closer to the smaller man, his presence suddenly intimidating despite his calm tone. The Double A is private property. You've delivered your message. Now I suggest you leave before I have Jackson escort you out. The foreman, who had been standing quietly to the side, straightened at these words, his hand resting meaningfully on his holstered revolver. Sheriff Thomas placed a restraining hand on Prescott's arm. We've said our piece, Arnold. Let's go. As the men climbed back into their wagon, Prescott called out, Town's talking, Abernathy. They're saying you're bewitched by a pretty face, letting a jinx live among decent folk. Yates didn't dignify this with a response, simply watching as the wagon pulled away. Only when it was a distant dust cloud did he turn to Madeline. Her hands were clenched into fists, and she was fighting to maintain her composure. Let's talk inside, he said quietly. In the kitchen, Madeline paced while Yates poured 2 cups of coffee, adding a splash of whiskey to each from a bottle he retrieved from a cabinet. Drink, he instructed, pushing a cup toward her. It'll steady you. She took a sip, grimacing slightly at the burn of the alcohol. I never stole those candlesticks, she said, her voice low and intense. Mrs. Peterson misplaced them and assumed I took them because I was the newest servant. I left rather than be accused publicly, but I never... I believe you, Yates interrupted simply. Madeline stared at him, caught off guard by his unhesitating support. You do? Yes. He met her gaze steadily. I've watched you work for 2 months. You've had access to valuable items here, Silver, money in the household accounts, personal belongings. If you were a thief, you'd have taken something by now. The simple logic of his defense brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. Yates sipped his coffee, watching her over the rim of his cup. Tell me about the other incidents, the fire, the typhoid. Madeline sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. The fire in Willow Creek happened during a thunderstorm. Lightning struck the general store. I worked there as a clerk and I was closing up alone that night. I barely escaped. Her hands trembled slightly at the memory. But because I was the only one there, some people whispered I might have said it deliberately. And the typhoid? In Silver Springs, before I worked for the Petersons, several people fell ill, including the young daughter of the family I worked for first. The child, Madeline swallowed hard. She didn't survive. Her mother was heartbroken and needed someone to blame. I had arrived in town just weeks before the outbreak, so you became the scapegoat, Yates finished, understanding in his eyes. Yes? Madeline stared into her cup. It's been that way since my parents died. I have no family to vouch for me, no roots anywhere. It makes me an easy target when things go wrong." Yates was quiet for a long moment. "What happened to your parents? You mentioned they died when you were 16. The question caught her off guard. She rarely spoke of it, the wound still tender even after 6 years. "Influenza," she said finally. "It swept through our town in Pennsylvania. They both fell ill within days of each other. I nursed them as best I could, but—" She shook her head. "When they were gone, I discovered my father had debts. The house, his small business, everything had to be sold to pay what was owed. So you were left with nothing. A distant cousin took me in, but only to secure my labor. She ran a boarding house and needed an unpaid servant more than she wanted family." Madeline's mouth twisted bitterly at the memory. "When I was 18, the son of a wealthy local merchant began to court me. He seemed kind, and I thought he might be my way to a better life." Yates watched her, saying nothing, giving her space to continue. "He proposed, and I accepted. But a week before the wedding, I discovered he had made a wager with his friends that he could convince the orphaned serving girl to marry him, only to jilt her at the altar." The old humiliation burned in her cheeks. "I confronted him, and he laughed, said no one would believe me over him." "What did you do?" Yates asked softly. "I left that night, took what little I had and headed west. I've been moving from town to town ever since, trying to outrun the stories that somehow always catch up to me." She looked up at Yates, vulnerability in her eyes. "Now they've found me here too." Yates reached across the table and, to her surprise, covered her hand with his. "You're not leaving the AA unless that's what you want. I don't care what Prescott or anyone in town says." The warmth of his hand on hers sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "But the rumors could damage your reputation, your business dealings." "Let me worry about that." His voice was firm. "You've earned your place here, Madeline." It was the first time he had used her given name, and something in the way he said it made her heart skip. She gently withdrew her hand, suddenly aware of how inappropriate such contact might be. "Thank you," she said again, unsure what else to say in the face of such unwavering support. "The men will stand by you too," Yates added. "They've seen your worth." As if summoned by his words, the kitchen door opened and Jackson entered, followed by Doc and Charlie. "Everything all right?" Jackson asked, his eyes moving between Yates and Madeline. "Sheriff's gone," Yates confirmed, "just delivering gossip, nothing more." Charlie stepped forward, his young face earnest. "We heard what that newspaper fellow was saying, Miss Rose. Don't you worry none about it. We know you're a good sort." Doc nodded in agreement. "Town folks always need something to chatter about. Next month it'll be something else." Their simple acceptance brought fresh tears to Madeline's eyes. For so long, she had been judged by rumors and assumptions. To be defended, to be seen for who she truly was, it was overwhelming. "Thank you," she managed, wiping at her eyes. "All of you." "Now," she added, straightening her shoulders and reaching for her apron, "I believe I have a supper to prepare." The men exchanged glances and Yates gave a slight nod, understanding her need to return to normalcy. As they filed out, he lingered behind. "Madeline," he said quietly, "you're not alone anymore." The simple statement, delivered without fanfare, struck her to her core. For that was exactly what she had been for so long, utterly alone in a hostile world. The realization that she now had people willing to stand beside her was almost too much to comprehend. After Yates left, she stood motionless in the kitchen for several minutes, absorbing the significance of what had just happened. Then, with a deep breath, she turned to the stove. There was work to be done, and for the first time in years, it felt like work worth doing, not just for survival, but for people who valued her presence. The incident with Sheriff Thomas and Prescott marked a turning point at the AA. The ranch hands closed ranks around Madeline, becoming almost protective. When they rode into town, they returned with reports of gossip, but also with assurances that they had defended her honor in no uncertain terms. "Told that blowhard at the Mercantile he didn't know what he was talking about," Eli reported one evening. "Said Miss Rose makes the best apple pie west of the Mississippi, and any man who speaks ill of her clearly hasn't tasted it." His brother Ezra grinned. And I might have mentioned that the AA hands take insults to their cook mighty personally. Madeline shook her head but couldn't suppress a smile. You shouldn't threaten people on my account. Wasn't threatening, Ezra protested innocently. Just informing. Even Frank, the silent cowboy, showed his support in his own way. He began bringing her wildflowers he found while riding the range, wordlessly placing them on the kitchen windowsill before disappearing back to his duties. As for Yates, something had shifted between them after their conversation. He sought her company more frequently, lingering after meals to talk or inviting her to join him on the porch in the evenings. Their conversations ranged from practical ranch matters to books they had read, dreams they held, and observations about life. Madeline found herself looking forward to these quiet moments together, even as she cautioned herself against reading too much into them. Yates was a kind employer who valued her work, nothing more. Yet sometimes she would catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, thoughtful, intense, almost tender. In those moments her heart would race, and she would quickly find some task to busy herself with. Summer advanced, bringing scorching days and the constant work of maintaining the ranch during the driest months. The men spent long hours ensuring the cattle had access to water, moving them between pastures to prevent overgrazing, and watching for the ever-present danger of wildfire. One particularly hot afternoon in late July, as Madeline was preserving beans from the garden, Jackson burst into the kitchen. "Fire!" he announced tersely. "East Ridge. Winds pushing it toward the home pasture." Madeline's heart leaped into her throat. Wildfires were the nightmare of every rancher, capable of destroying thousands of acres in hours, consuming livestock, buildings, and human lives with indiscriminate fury. "Where's Yates?" she asked, already untying her apron. "Riding out with the men to move the cattle. Asked me to get you to safety." Jackson grabbed a canteen from the hook by the door. "Pack what you need. We're heading to the creek bend. It's wide enough there to protect us if the fire turns this way." "I can help," Madeline insisted, thinking of the animals, the ranch house, everything Yates had built. Jackson shook his head firmly. "Boss's orders, and he's right, we need to focus on fighting the fire, not worrying about your safety." Recognizing the logic, if not liking it, Madeline quickly gathered a few essentials: water, blankets, medical supplies she kept for emergencies. As she worked, she remembered the devastating fire in Willow Creek, how quickly it had consumed the store, how powerless she had felt. "Ready?" Jackson asked, returning with a wagon hitched to two sturdy draft horses. Madeline nodded, though fear clutched at her heart. "Be careful," she told Jackson as he helped her onto the seat. "All of you." "Always are," he replied with forced lightness. "Been fighting prairie fires since before you were born, Miss Rose." They drove swiftly toward the creek, where a bend created a wide gravel bar largely free of vegetation. From this vantage point, Madeline could see the smoke rising in a dark column to the east, staining the blue sky. "Stay here," Jackson instructed as he helped her down. "If the fire shifts and comes this way, get in the water. It's your best protection." With that, he was gone, driving the wagon back toward the distant smoke. Alone, Madeline paced the gravel bar anxiously, watching as the smoke grew thicker. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of riders moving along the ridgeline, tiny figures against the vastness of the landscape. Hours passed, the sun beginning its descent, yet the smoke showed no signs of diminishing. If anything, it seemed to be spreading, and Madeline's worry intensified. Were the men safe? Was the fire being contained, or was it devouring everything in its path, including the ranch that had become her home? The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention. A rider was approaching fast, and even at a distance, she recognized Yates's distinctive posture in the saddle. Relief flooded through her, quickly followed by concern as she noticed the awkward way he was sitting. As he drew closer, she gasped. His shirt was torn and blackened in places, and a bloody gash ran along his left arm. His face was streaked with soot, and exhaustion was evident in every line of his body. "Yates!" she cried, rushing to meet him as he dismounted stiffly. "You're hurt!" "It's not serious," he said, though he winced as she reached for his injured arm. The fire's contained on the east side. Men are watching for flare-ups, but the worst danger is past. Sit down, she ordered, leading him to a fallen log. Let me look at that arm. Too tired to argue, Yates complied. Madeline retrieved the medical supplies she had brought and gently pushed up his torn sleeve. The cut was long, but thankfully not too deep, likely from a falling branch or sharp rock as he fought the fire. This needs cleaning, she murmured, dampening a cloth with water from the canteen. It will sting. Yates barely flinched as she carefully cleaned the wound, removing bits of ash and dirt. His eyes never left her face as she worked, focused intently on her expression of concentration. How did it happen? She asked, partly to distract him as she began bandaging the arm. Ember lit a patch of dry grass behind us, had to ride through to get the strays moving toward safety. Branch came down, caught me off guard. He spoke matter-of-factly, as though such dangers were simply part of life, which, Madeline realized, they were for men like him. The others? Is everyone safe? Yates nodded. All accounted for. Charlie got some minor burns and Doc took a fall, but nothing serious. She secured the bandage and sat back. The cattle? The ranch? Lost maybe 30 head that we know of. Could have been much worse. He rubbed a hand over his face, leaving a fresh smudge of soot on his cheek. House is safe. Fire never got that far. Relief washed over her. Thank God. Indeed. Yates looked at her finished handiwork. You have a gentle touch. Where did you learn to tend wounds? Necessity, she answered simply. When you're on your own, you learn to care for yourself. She hesitated. And I helped nurse my parents, though I couldn't save them in the end. Yates caught her hand as she began to pull away. Thank you, he said softly. Not just for this. He nodded toward his bandaged arm. For caring about the ranch. About all of us. Their eyes met and something electric passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of how their lives had become intertwined in ways neither had expected. Madeline felt her breath catch. Suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, how his hand still held hers. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching riders. Yates released her hand and stood as Jackson and several others appeared, leading horses laden with firefighting equipment. Creek Bend held the eastern line, Jackson reported, dismounting wearily. Fire's burning itself out against the rocky slopes to the north. Eli and Frank are staying to watch through the night, but I think we've got it beat. The men looked exhausted, faces blackened with soot, clothes singed and dirty. Madeline immediately began distributing water and checking for injuries. Charlie's burns were painful, but superficial, and Doc's fall had resulted in nothing worse than bruised ribs. As night fell, they made camp on the gravel bar, judging it safer to remain near the creek until morning. Madeline prepared a simple meal from the provisions she had brought, and the men ate in weary silence before stretching out to sleep beneath the stars. Unable to rest, Madeline sat watching the distant glow of the dying fire on the horizon. Yates joined her after ensuring the horses were secure. You should sleep, she told him. You're exhausted. So are you, he countered, settling beside her on the ground. Yet here you sit, she shrugged. Too many thoughts. About the fire. Partly, she drew her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. It brought back memories of Willow Creek, of feeling helpless while everything burned. Yates was silent for a moment. Fire's a harsh teacher, he said finally. Shows us how little control we truly have, but also what we're willing to fight for. Madeline glanced at him. In the faint moonlight, with soot still streaking his face and exhaustion evident in the set of his shoulders, he looked somehow more real than she had ever seen him, stripped of pretense, vulnerable in his weariness. You could have been killed today, she said softly. Part of ranching life, he replied. We face danger so often we forget to fear it. I've feared it, she admitted, for all of you. Yates turned to look at her fully, something unreadable in his expression. It matters, he said quietly. Having someone who would mourn if the worst happened, it changes how a man sees his risks. The simple statement carried a weight that settled deep in Madeline's chest. She had spent so long being unwanted, unwelcome, that the idea of her feelings mattering to someone to him was almost too much to comprehend. I would, she whispered. Mourn, that is. Their eyes held in the darkness, and Madeline felt as though something fundamental had shifted between them, some barrier fallen away to reveal a truth neither had fully acknowledged before. Yates reached out slowly, his hand coming to rest against her cheek. His palm was rough with calluses, warm against her skin. Madeline, he said, her name a question and an answer all at once. She leaned into his touch, her heart racing. For a breathless moment she thought he might kiss her, wanted him to, with an intensity that shocked her. But instead, he gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and withdrew his hand. We should rest, he said, his voice husky. Tomorrow will bring much work. Confused and oddly disappointed, Madeline nodded. As they settled on their makeshift beds beneath the vast canopy of stars, she replayed the moment in her mind, wondering if she had imagined the tenderness in his touch, the intensity in his eyes. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of fire and loss, but always with Yates appearing at the critical moment, leading her to safety. The aftermath of the fire brought exhausting days of recovery work. Though the ranch house and main buildings had been spared, several miles of fencing were destroyed, and the eastern pasture was a blackened wasteland. The cattle that had survived needed to be regrouped and accounted for, with injured animals requiring special attention. Despite the challenges, Madeline found a new sense of purpose in supporting the recovery efforts. She rode out with the men to deliver meals, helped Doc tend to burned animals, and worked alongside Charlie and the brothers to salvage usable materials from the damaged fencing. You're a natural horsewoman, Yates observed one evening as she returned from delivering supplies to the men working the far pasture. Where did you learn to ride? Madeline smiled as she dismounted from the gentle mare Yates had assigned to her use. My father taught me as a girl. We lived near the edge of town, and he kept 2 horses for his delivery business. I wasn't very good then, too timid. But necessity makes for a quick education. That it does, Yates agreed, taking the reins and walking alongside her toward the stable. You've changed since you arrived here. Have I? She glanced at him curiously. You stand straighter, speak more confidently. Your eyes don't constantly search for escape routes. He offered a small smile. You've stopped expecting disaster at every turn. Madeline considered this. Perhaps because disaster already came, in the form of that fire, and we survived it together. Perhaps, Yates agreed, or perhaps you've finally found somewhere you can be yourself without fear of judgment. The observation struck her with its accuracy. At the AA, she had gradually shed the defensive shell she had worn for years. Here, she wasn't that poor, orphaned girl or the jinx or any of the other labels that had followed her. She was simply Madeline, valued for her contributions, accepted for who she was. I have you to thank for that, she said softly. You saw something in me that day in town that no one else bothered to look for. Yates stopped walking, turning to face her fully. I saw a woman with fire in her eyes despite everything life had thrown at her. Someone unwilling to be beaten down by circumstances or others' opinions. His voice lowered. I still see that woman, Madeline, every day. The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Since that night by the creek, something had been building between them, unspoken but palpable. Moments of accidental touch that lingered too long. Conversations that strayed from the practical to the personal. Glances held across crowded rooms. Yet Yates had maintained a careful distance, never crossing the invisible line between employer and employee. Madeline had told herself this was proper, necessary even. But in moments like this, with his eyes reflecting the golden light of sunset, she found herself wishing desperately that he would. Yates, she began, uncertain what she even wanted to say, only knowing that something needed to be acknowledged between them. The stable door opened suddenly, and Jackson emerged, breaking the moment. Boss, that stallion's acting up again. Kicked through the stall door. Yates's expression shifted back to business. I'll see to him. Take Thunder back to the corral, will you, Jackson? With a nod to Madeline, he strode into the stable, leaving her with a curious Jackson and a sense of words left unspoken. Later that evening, as she prepared supper, Madeline found herself reflecting on how thoroughly the Double A had become home in just a few months. She knew each man's preferences now, how Doc liked his coffee black but his steak bloody, how the brothers competed to see who could eat the most biscuits at breakfast, how Charlie secretly loved her apple dumplings but pretended to prefer pie because he thought it more manly. And Yates, she knew the sound of his footsteps on the porch, could distinguish his voice among the men's even from a distance, understood his moods from the set of his shoulders. When had she begun to notice such things? When had his presence become so essential to her sense of well-being? The kitchen door opened, and Pedro entered, holding a crate of vegetables from town. "Supply wagon came through, Miss Rose. Thought you might want these for supper." "Thank you, Pedro," she smiled, taking the crate. "Perfect timing." He lingered, seeming uncharacteristically hesitant. "There is talk in town," he finally said, "about the boss and you." Madeline stilled, her hands freezing over the vegetables. "What kind of talk?" Pedro shifted uncomfortably. "They say he has feelings for you, that perhaps you have enchanted him." "Enchanted?" Madeline repeated, incredulous. "See, some still believe you bring bad luck. They say the fire—" He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "They think I caused the fire?" The absurdity would have been laughable if it weren't so infuriating. "I wasn't anywhere near the East Ridge when it started." "I know this," Pedro assured her hastily. "We all know this. But people who fear what they do not understand will create stories." Madeline set down the potato she was holding with deliberate care. "And what of these feelings they attribute to Yates?" Pedro's dark eyes studied her face. "It is not my place to speak of the boss's heart, but I have worked for him 5 years, Miss Rose. I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." With that cryptic statement, he nodded respectfully and left, leaving Madeline staring after him, her mind racing. Could it be true? Did Yates harbor feelings beyond those of an employer for a valued employee? And if so, why had he maintained such careful distance? The answer came to her with sudden clarity. Of course he would keep his distance. He was her employer, responsible for her livelihood and security. To express romantic interest would put her in an impossible position, making her feel obligated or, worse, trapped. And there was his reputation to consider. The ranch's success depended on his standing in the community, his business relationships with merchants and cattle buyers. Becoming romantically involved with a woman dogged by rumors of bad luck and questionable character could damage everything he had built. No, Madeline decided as she returned to preparing supper, whatever Pedro thought he saw in Yates's glances, the reality was that anything beyond their current relationship was impossible. She would continue, as she'd been grateful for his kindness and support, but expecting nothing more. This resolution lasted precisely until the moment Yates entered the kitchen an hour later, still in his work clothes, a streak of dirt across one cheek, his hair windblown from riding. "Something smells wonderful," he said, washing his hands at the basin. "Beef stew with dumplings," she replied, forcing her voice to remain casual. I remember Charlie saying it reminded him of home. Yates dried his hands on a towel, watching her stir the pot. "You notice things like that? What brings each man comfort?" "It's my job to notice," she said with a small shrug. "Is that all it is? A job?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. Madeline turned to face him, wooden spoon still in hand. "What else would it be?" she asked carefully. Yates stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, smell the leather and sage scent that clung to him. "I think you know," he said softly. Madeline's heart thundered in her chest. "Yates, The kitchen door banged open as Charlie burst in, oblivious to the tension in the room. "Miss Rose, the boys are wondering when supper will be ready. We're starving after moving those fallen trees all day." Madeline stepped back from Yates, flustered. 20 minutes, Charlie. Tell them to wash up." The young cowboy nodded and disappeared as quickly as he had arrived. When Madeline looked back at Yates, his expression had become unreadable again. "We should talk," he said simply. "After supper, on the porch." She nodded, unable to trust her voice. and he left her to finish preparing the meal with trembling hands and a mind racing with possibilities. Supper that evening was a boisterous affair, with the men in high spirits despite their exhaustion. The cleared acreage was already showing signs of new growth after the fire, and they had discovered that the damage to the eastern pasture was less severe than initially feared. Madeline moved through the routine of serving and clearing, hyper-aware of Yates at the head of the table, of the weight of their impending conversation. When the meal was done, and the men had retired to the bunkhouse or their evening chores, she steeled herself and stepped out onto the porch. Yates was waiting, leaning against the railing, his profile outlined against the deepening twilight. He turned at the sound of her footsteps. "Join me?" he asked, gesturing to the bench where they often sat in the evenings. Madeline settled beside him, smoothing her skirts nervously. For a long moment, neither spoke, the silence filled with the chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. "Pedro told me about the talk in town," she finally said, deciding directness was best. "About you and me." Yates sighed. "I expected as much. News travels fast out here." "Is it true?" The question escaped before she could reconsider. "What they're saying about your feelings." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "What do you think, Madeline?" "I think," she swallowed hard, "I think you're a kind man who took a chance on me when no one else would. I think you've been generous and supportive. But I also think you're my employer, and anything beyond that would be complicated." "It would," he agreed, "which is why I've kept my distance despite wanting very much not to." The admission, so simply stated, sent a rush of warmth through her. "Yates, let me finish," he said gently. "When I saw you that day in town, standing there with your head held high despite everyone turning against you, something in me recognized something in you. A kindred spirit, perhaps. Someone who understood what it means to stand alone." He shifted to face her more fully. "I told myself I was just offering you a job, a chance to prove yourself, but I knew even then that it was more. I was drawn to your courage, your resilience, and as I've come to know you, your kindness, your intelligence, the way you care for everyone around you without expecting anything in return, that feeling has only grown stronger." Madeline's heart raced at his words, at the undisguised emotion in his eyes. "But the ranch, your reputation—" "Mean nothing if I deny what I feel," he interrupted. "I've lived my life according to what's expected, what's practical, built this ranch, carried on my father's legacy. But I've never allowed myself to reach for happiness." He took her hand in his. "Until now." "What are you saying?" she whispered, though she knew hoped what his answer would be. "I'm saying that I love you, Madeline Rose. Not as an employer loves a valued employee, but as a man loves a woman who has captured his heart completely." The declaration, spoken so plainly, so honestly, stole her breath. For years she had guarded herself against hope, against attachment, knowing it would only lead to pain when the inevitable rejection came. But looking into Yates's eyes, she saw no deception, no ulterior motive, only sincere emotion. "People will talk," she said weakly, one last protest against allowing herself to believe. "People already talk," he countered with a small smile. "Let them. The only opinion that matters to me is yours." His expression grew serious again. "I don't expect an answer now. Take time to consider what this would mean, but know that my feelings won't change, regardless of your decision." Madeline looked down at their joined hands, his larger one enveloping hers with gentle strength. In that moment, all her carefully constructed defenses crumbled. She had been running for so long from her past, from connection, from the very possibility of love. But here, with this man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and still chosen her, she found she no longer wanted to run. "I don't need time," she said, raising her eyes to his. "I've spent my whole life being cautious, protecting myself from hurt. But you—" her voice caught. "You make me brave, Yates. You make me want to take risks again." "Is that a yes?" he asked, hope brightening his eyes. "It's a, I love you too," she whispered, "and I'm terrified by how much." With infinite tenderness, Yates raised a hand to cup her cheek. "Don't be afraid," he murmured. Not of this, not of us. When his lips finally met hers, Madeline felt as though something long broken inside her was finally healing. The kiss was gentle at first, almost reverent, but deepened as she responded, years of loneliness and longing pouring into this connection. When they finally parted, both breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the day you started tending my arm by the creek, he admitted. Madeline laughed softly. I've wanted you to do that since that same day. He smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. We've wasted time then. Not wasted, she corrected. We needed that time, to be sure. Yates nodded, understanding in his eyes. And are you? Sure. More than I've ever been about anything. She hesitated. But Yates, what will this mean? For the ranch? For your standing in the community? It means I'll have the woman I love by my side, he said simply. As for the rest, those who matter will accept us. Those who don't, he shrugged. Their loss. As they sat together in the gathering darkness, Madeline felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. For the first time since her parents' deaths, she wasn't alone. She had found not just a home, but a heart to match her own, someone who saw her fully and loved her anyway. What happens now? She asked softly. Yates squeezed her hand. Now we build a life together, if that's what you want. It is, she whispered. More than anything. His smile in response was like the sun breaking through clouds after a storm, brilliant, warming, full of promise. And as he drew her into another kiss, Madeline knew with absolute certainty that she had finally found where she belonged. The news of their courtship spread quickly through the ranch and into town. The reaction among the hands was overwhelmingly positive. They had watched the relationship develop and saw how happy Yates and Madeline made each other. Even Frank offered a rare smile when Yates officially announced their intention to court. In Copper Creek, however, opinions were decidedly mixed. Some, like Sheriff Thomas, offered cautious congratulations. Others, led by the ever-gossiping Prescott, were quick to revive rumors of Madeline's supposed bad luck and questionable past. Let them talk, Yates said firmly when Madeline expressed concern about the damage to his reputation. Their opinions matter far less than our happiness. And they were happy. Their courtship unfolded with a sweetness that surprised them both. Yates revealed a romantic side he had kept carefully hidden, bringing Madeline wildflowers he found while riding the range, reading poetry with her in the evenings, teaching her to shoot and ride better. For her part, Madeline blossomed under his affection. The constant fear that had been her companion for so long gradually receded, replaced by a growing confidence in herself and their future together. Late summer gave way to fall, bringing with it the bustle of roundup. Madeline threw herself into supporting the ranch during this crucial time, rising before dawn to prepare substantial breakfasts for the men and often riding out to deliver hot meals to the remote locations where they worked. One crisp October afternoon, as she approached a distant meadow where Yates and several hands were sorting cattle, she spotted a group of riders approaching from the direction of town. Even at a distance, she recognized Prescott's portly figure among them, along with Sheriff Thomas and several men she didn't know. A knot of apprehension formed in her stomach as she urged her mare forward, reaching Yates just as the riders did. Abernathy, Prescott called, an unpleasant smile on his face. Got some visitors for you and your lady friend. Yates straightened, his expression guarded as he moved to stand beside Madeline's horse. What's this about, Sheriff? Thomas looked uncomfortable. These gentlemen are from Silver Springs, Yates. Mr. Wilson here says he employed Miss Rose before she came to Copper Creek. A tall, severe-looking man with graying temples nudged his horse forward. Indeed I did, and I've come to reclaim what she stole from my household. I stole nothing, Madeline said firmly, though her heart raced with the familiar fear of being accused. As I told Mrs. Wilson when I left, I never touched her silver. Not the silver, Wilson replied coldly, though that's still missing as well. No, I'm referring to my pocket watch, my grandfather's gold pocket watch that disappeared the same day you did. Yates's voice was dangerously calm. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Wilson. Do you have any proof? Proof? Wilson scoffed. The timing is proof enough, and now I hear she's wormed her way into your household and your affections. Thought you ought to know the kind of woman you're dealing with. I know exactly what kind of woman Madeline is, Yates replied, his hand moving to rest protectively on her leg. And I know a vindictive lie when I hear one. Prescott's eyes gleamed with the prospect of fresh gossip. Perhaps a search of her belongings would settle the matter. Absolutely not, Yates snapped. You have no authority to search my property based on unfounded accusations. Sheriff Thomas cleared his throat. Actually, Yates, if there's reasonable suspicion— There isn't, Yates interrupted firmly. And you know it, Thomas. This is harassment, pure and simple. Madeline slid from her horse, moving to stand beside Yates. I have nothing to hide, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I've never stolen anything in my life, Mr. Wilson, and I certainly didn't take your watch. Wilson's face reddened with anger. You expect us to believe— I expect you to leave my property, Yates cut in. Now, before I have my men escort you out. As if on cue, Jackson and the others moved to flank Yates and Madeline, their expressions making it clear they would follow through on the implied threat. Sheriff Thomas, recognizing the potential for violence, raised his hands placatingly. Let's all calm down. Mr. Wilson, without concrete evidence, there's little I can do officially. This isn't over, Wilson warned, glaring at Madeline. People should know what kind of thief they're harboring. The only thieves I see are men attempting to steal a good woman's reputation, Yates replied coldly. Good day, gentlemen. The visitors departed, though Prescott's smug expression suggested the confrontation was exactly what he had hoped for. Once they were out of earshot, Yates turned to Madeline, concern etched on his features. Are you all right? She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. I never took his watch, Yates. I swear it. I know, he said simply, taking her hands in his. I never doubted that for a moment. His unwavering faith nearly undid her. Why can't they just leave me in peace? Will I ever outrun these accusations? Perhaps it's time to stop running, Yates suggested gently, to stand and fight instead. Jackson stepped forward. Boss is right. Miss Rose, running just makes you look guilty, and you've got something now you didn't have before. What's that? She asked. The foreman gestured to the circle of ranch hands gathered around them. Us. People who know your true character and will stand by you. Tears pricked at Madeline's eyes at the simple declaration of loyalty. Thank you, she whispered. That evening, after the men had retired and they were alone on the porch, Yates took her hand. I've been thinking about what happened today, he said quietly. Madeline tensed. I understand if you're having second thoughts. The accusations, the gossip, it's a lot to ask anyone to bear. Second thoughts? Yates looked genuinely surprised. About you? Never. He squeezed her hand. But I have been thinking that perhaps it's time to make our arrangement more permanent. Her heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? In answer, Yates reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment. He smiled ruefully. This isn't how I imagined doing this, but today reminded me that life doesn't always give us perfect moments. We have to create them ourselves. With that, he slid from the bench to one knee before her, opening the pouch to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. Madeline Rose, he said, his voice husky with emotion. From the moment you came into my life, you've brought light and warmth to places I didn't even realize were dark and cold. You are the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman I've ever known, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it. He took a deep breath. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Madeline stared at the ring, then at Yates's face, open and vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. In his eyes she saw not just love, but a promise of protection, of partnership, of a future where she would never again face the world alone. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Yates, I will marry you. His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, catching the last light of sunset in a flash of gold and pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained as he rose to sit beside her again. "My father gave it to her when they decided to come west together. He said she was his pearl of great price, worth everything he had." Madeline touched the ring reverently. "It's beautiful, and even more precious knowing its history." Yates pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We'll add our own chapter to that history, a long and happy one." As she leaned into his embrace, Madeline marveled at the journey that had brought her here from a frightened, friendless young woman to a bride-to-be, surrounded by people who valued and defended her. The path had been difficult, marked by loss and struggle, but it had led her to this man, this home, this moment of perfect belonging. "I love you," she murmured against his shoulder. "More than I can say." "Then show me," he replied softly, tilting her face up for a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. Word of their engagement spread quickly, eliciting congratulations from the ranch hands and a mixture of reactions in town. Some, like the kindly general store owner Mrs. Benson, offered sincere good wishes. Others whispered behind their hands about Yates being bewitched or deceived. "Let them talk," Yates said again when Madeline reported some particularly nasty gossip. "Once we're married, they'll have to accept you as Mrs. Abernathy, mistress of the AA. They planned a simple ceremony for early December, before the worst of winter set in." Despite her lack of family, Madeline found herself surrounded by support as the date approached. Mrs. Benson helped her select fabric for a wedding dress, and to her surprise, the ranch hands pooled their resources to purchase a beautiful set of silver hairbrushes as a wedding gift. Even Frank, the silent cowboy, contributed in his own way, presenting her with a small wooden box he had carved himself, inlaid with a delicate pattern of stars. "For your treasures," he said gruffly, the most words she had ever heard him speak at once. "Every lady should have a safe place for special things." The gesture touched her deeply. "Thank you, Frank. It's beautiful." He nodded once, then added quietly, "You're good for the boss. Make him smile again. Hasn't done much of that since his father passed." With that simple observation, he retreated back into his customary silence, but Madeline carried his words with her, warmed by the knowledge that she had indeed brought joy back into Yates's life, just as he had brought it into hers. As the wedding day approached, however, so did renewed attempts to discredit Madeline. Prescott published a scathing article in the Copper Creek Gazette, rehashing all the old rumors and adding insinuations about her relationship with Yates that bordered on scandalous. "Ignore it," Yates advised when she showed him the paper, her hands trembling with anger and hurt. "Responding only gives him more fodder." But the rumors took a more serious turn when Wilson returned to town, this time accompanied by his wife. They took rooms at the hotel and began systematically spreading stories about Madeline's supposed thievery and deception. The situation came to a head one afternoon when Madeline was in the general store selecting supplies for the wedding feast. Mrs. Wilson entered, followed by several town women, and made a show of clutching her purse tighter. "One can't be too careful of one's valuables," she announced loudly, her gaze fixed pointedly on Madeline, "especially with known thieves about." Madeline straightened her spine, determined not to show how deeply the words cut. "Mrs. Wilson," she acknowledged coolly, "I'm surprised to see you in Copper Creek." "I'm sure you are," the older woman replied with false sweetness. "No doubt you thought you'd escape the consequences of your actions, but justice has a way of finding the guilty." Mrs. Benson, arranging goods behind the counter, frowned at the exchange. "Is there something I can help you with, Mrs. Wilson?" "You can help by warning your customers about who they're doing business with," Mrs. Wilson replied. "This woman," she pointed accusingly at Madeline, "stole valuable heirlooms from my home after we took her in out of charity." Madeline's patience snapped. After months of enduring whispers and accusations, something in her refused to back down any longer. "I stole nothing," she said clearly, loud enough for everyone in the store to hear. "I worked honestly for my wages in your home, which you often forgot to pay. When I left, I took only what was rightfully mine." Mrs. Wilson's face flushed an ugly red. How dare you, my husband's watch was likely misplaced, as was your silver, Madeline interrupted, or perhaps taken by someone else in your household, but not by me. Who would believe you over us? Mrs. Wilson scoffed. A nobody, an orphan with no family to speak for her character? I would, came a firm voice from the doorway. Madeline turned to see Yates standing there, his expression thunderous as he surveyed the scene. He crossed to stand beside her, his presence lending her strength. Madeline Rose has more honor and integrity than anyone I've ever known, he continued, addressing not just Mrs. Wilson, but the gathered townspeople. In the month she's lived at the AA, she has proven her character 100 times over. If she says she didn't take your possessions, then she didn't. Mrs. Wilson sneered. Of course you'd defend her. Men are easily deceived by a pretty face and a sob story. Is that what happened to your watch, Mrs. Wilson? Yates asked mildly. Someone with a pretty face and a sob story took it? Because I've been wondering why focus so intently on Madeline when there must have been other servants in your household. The question caught the woman off guard. That's not relevant. She was the only one who disappeared the same day as the watch. Interesting. Yates's tone remained conversational, but Madeline could sense the steel beneath. And when exactly did you notice the watch was missing? That very day, Mrs. Wilson declared. My husband went to check the time and discovered it gone from his drawer. The same drawer where he kept the household money, I presume, Yates pressed. The money you forgot to pay Madeline, as she mentioned? Mrs. Wilson's composure slipped further. How we arrange our household is none of your concern. Perhaps not, Yates agreed, but false accusations against my fiancé very much are my concern. He glanced around at the watching townspeople. I wonder how many of you have actually spoken with Madeline, gotten to know her beyond the rumors. Because those of us who have the men who work for me, Mrs. Benson here, Reverend Johnson, we see a very different person than the one the Wilsons describe. Mrs. Benson stepped forward. It's true. Miss Rose has been nothing but kind and honest in all her dealings with me. And I've seen how she treats others with respect and compassion, even those who whisper behind her back. Encouraged by this support, Madeline faced Mrs. Wilson directly. I understand why it's easier to blame me than to consider other possibilities. I was an outsider, with no one to defend me. But I am not that friendless girl anymore, and I will not allow you to slander me unchallenged. Mrs. Wilson's face contorted with rage. This isn't over, she hissed, echoing her husband's earlier threat. We'll see what people think when we're through. Yes, we will, Yates replied calmly. Because I've invited every person in this town to our wedding next week. They can judge Madeline's character for themselves, rather than relying on the words of strangers. With that announcement hanging in the air, he offered Madeline his arm. Shall we, my dear? I believe we have preparations to finish. Head held high, Madeline left the store on Yates's arm, aware of the speculative gazes following them, but no longer afraid of what people might think. For the first time in her life, she was not facing accusations alone. Thank you, she said quietly once they were outside, for defending me. Yates squeezed her hand. Always. But you were doing a fine job yourself before I arrived. He smiled down at her. You've changed, Madeline. The woman I met months ago might have fled that confrontation. Today, you stood your ground. She considered this. I suppose I've changed. I'm not afraid anymore, not of them, not of the past. I know who I am now and who stands with me. And who is that? He asked softly. Madeline smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. I am Madeline Rose, soon to be Madeline Abernathy. I am loved, I am home, and that's all that matters. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a flurry of preparations. True to his word, Yates had invited the entire town, though he confided to Madeline that he expected only a fraction would actually attend. Those who matter will come, he assured her. The rest can keep their distance and their opinions. To their surprise, however, interest in the wedding seemed to grow rather than diminish after the confrontation in the general store. Mrs. Benson reported that many townspeople had been impressed by Yates's defense of Madeline and were reconsidering their views. People respect a man who stands by his woman, she explained. Makes them wonder if maybe they've been too quick to judge. Even Sheriff Thomas stopped by the ranch to offer his congratulations and unofficially inform them that the Wilsons had departed Copper Creek after finding little support for their accusations. Seems folks around here are more interested in who you are now than who you might have been before, he said with a hint of a smile. Can't say I'm sorry to see them go. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, with a light dusting of snow that transformed the ranch into a glistening wonderland. In her small room, Madeline prepared with the help of Mrs. Benson, donning the simple but elegant white dress they had created together. You look beautiful, dear, Mrs. Benson said, fastening the last button. Yates won't know what hit him. Madeline smiled nervously at her reflection. The dress was perfectly fitted, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, and her hair was arranged in soft curls with a crown of winter berries and evergreen. Around her neck hung her mother's locket, the only piece of her past she had carried into this new life. I wish they could be here, she said softly. My parents, they would have loved Yates. Mrs. Benson squeezed her shoulder. They're watching over you, child, and they'd be so proud of the woman you've become. A knock at the door announced Jackson, who had been given the honor of escorting Madeline to the ceremony in the absence of family. Ready, Miss Rose? He asked, his usual gruff manner softened by the occasion. Everything's set up in the main room. Got quite a crowd out there. Madeline took a deep breath. I'm ready. The main room of the ranch house had been transformed. Furniture had been moved aside to create an aisle, and evergreen boughs decorated with red berries and white ribbons adorned every surface. Lanterns cast a warm glow over the assembled guests, the ranch hands in their Sunday best, a surprising number of townspeople, and at the far end, waiting beside Reverend Johnson, Yates. He looked magnificent in a new black suit, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaven. But it was his expression as he caught sight of her that Madeline would remember forever, a look of such pure joy and love that it took her breath away. As Jackson led her down the makeshift aisle, Madeline was aware of the watching eyes, the murmured compliments, the smiles of approval. But her focus remained on Yates, on the future they were about to begin together. When she reached him, he took her hands in his eyes never leaving her face. You're breathtaking, he whispered. Dearly beloved, Reverend Johnson began, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Yates Abernathy and Madeline Rose in holy matrimony. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. They exchanged traditional vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other for all their days. When Yates slipped the gold band he had selected to accompany her engagement ring onto her finger, his hands were steady, his voice clear and certain. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Johnson declared. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. You may kiss your bride. Yates cupped Madeline's face with gentle hands and kissed her with a tenderness that spoke volumes about his feelings. When they turned to face their guests as Mr. and Mrs. Abernathy, the room erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration that followed was joyous and uninhibited. Tables laden with food prepared by Madeline and several town women were set up in the dining room, and someone produced a fiddle, leading to impromptu dancing in the cleared main room. I can't believe how many people came, Madeline said as she and Yates took a moment alone on the porch, watching the snow begin to fall again. After everything. People respond to truth and sincerity, Yates replied, his arm warm around her waist. And to love. It's hard to maintain suspicion in the face of genuine happiness. She leaned her head against his shoulder. I am happy, Yates. Happier than I ever thought possible. As am I. He pressed a kiss to her temple. And this is just the beginning, Mrs. Abernathy. The sound of her new name sent a thrill through her. Mrs. Abernathy, she repeated softly. I like how that sounds. So do I. His voice deepened. Though I confess I'm looking forward to when the celebrating ends, and we can begin our life together properly. Madeline felt heat rise in her cheeks at his meaning, but anticipation fluttered in her stomach. They had agreed to wait until marriage, both valuing the tradition and wanting their union to begin with the respect it deserved. "The guests will be leaving soon," she said, glancing back at the warmly lit windows. "It's a long ride back to town in the snow." As if on cue, the door opened behind them, and Jackson appeared. "Boss, folks are starting to head out. Thought you might want to see them off." They returned to the celebration, bidding farewell to the departing townspeople. Many who had once looked at Madeline with suspicion now offered genuine congratulations and invitations to visit. Mrs. Benson embraced her warmly, whispering, "You've won them over, dear, just by being yourself." Finally, only the ranch hands remained, and they too prepared to give the newlyweds privacy, retreating to the bunkhouse with good-natured teasing and heartfelt well-wishes. "Take care of her, boss," Charlie said earnestly, shaking Yates's hand. "She's 1 in a million." "I know it," Yates replied, his arm around Madeline's waist. "Believe me, I know it." When the last of the men had gone, leaving them alone in the house that was now truly their home, Yates turned to Madeline with a tender smile. "Welcome home, Mrs. Abernathy," he said softly, lifting her into his arms in one smooth motion. "To the first day of forever." As he carried her toward the master bedroom, their bedroom now, Madeline wrapped her arms around his neck, marveling at how far she had come from that desperate day in Copper Creek, when a tall rancher had looked at a woman surrounded by suspicion and seen hope instead of hopelessness. "Forever," she whispered against his lips. "I like the sound of that." 5 years later, the spring sunshine bathed the AA ranch in golden light as Madeline stood on the porch, watching her husband lead their 3-year-old daughter, Sarah, on her first pony ride. The little girl's delighted laughter carried across the yard, mingling with the sounds of ranch life, cattle lowing in the distance, men calling to each other as they worked, the rhythmic pounding of hammer on nail as Jackson supervised the expansion of the bunkhouse. "Mama, look!" Sarah called, her dark curls bouncing as the gentle pony walked in a circle, Yates holding the lead rope firmly. "I'm riding like Papa." "I see you, sweetheart," Madeline called back. "You're doing wonderfully." From the cradle beside her, 4-month-old James began to fuss, tiny fists waving in the air. Madeline lifted her son, cradling him against her shoulder as she continued to watch her husband and daughter. The past 5 years had brought changes to the AA, all for the better. The ranch had prospered under Yates's careful management, expanding its operations to include a successful horse breeding program that was gaining recognition throughout the territory. The original ranch house had been enlarged to accommodate their growing family, with a new wing added last year in anticipation of James's arrival. But the most significant changes had been less tangible. The suspicion and rumors that had once dogged Madeline's steps had gradually faded, replaced by respect and genuine friendship from the townspeople of Copper Creek. She was now a valued member of the community, serving on the school board and organizing social events that brought ranching families together through the long winter months. Even Prescott had eventually come around, publishing a retraction of sorts after the birth of Sarah, when it became obvious that the curse he had predicted would befall the Abernathy ranch had failed to materialize. Instead, the AA had thrived, as had Yates and Madeline's marriage. "That's enough for today, Princess," Yates was saying as he lifted Sarah from the pony's back. "You did very well for your first lesson." "Can I ride again tomorrow, Papa? Please?" the little girl begged, her blue eyes so like her father's, wide with excitement. "We'll see," Yates replied, tousling her curls, "if you're very good for Mama today while I ride out to check the north pasture." Sarah nodded solemnly, then spotted Madeline and James on the porch. "Mama, did you see me? I didn't fall off even once." "I saw, darling. You're a natural horsewoman," Madeline assured her as the child bounded up the steps, "just like your father." Yates followed at a more measured pace, his smile warm as he took in the sight of his family. At 35, he was in his prime, still lean and strong from daily work, but with the settled confidence of a man who had found his purpose in life. "And how's the little cowboy this morning?" he asked, gently stroking James's downy head. "Hungry as usual," Madeline replied with a smile. "Your son has your appetite." "A growing boy needs his strength," Yates said with mock seriousness. "Isn't that right, James?" The baby gurgled in response, his tiny hand closing around his father's finger with surprising strength. "Charlie and Pedro should be back from town soon with the mail and supplies," Yates said, reluctantly withdrawing his finger from his son's grasp. "Then I'll head out to check those new calves." Madeline nodded. "Sarah and I will be fine. We have baking to do, don't we, sweetheart?" "Apple pie," the little girl exclaimed, "for Doc's birthday." "That's right. And if you're very helpful, you might get to lick the spoon," Madeline promised. As Sarah skipped inside to wash her hands, Yates drew Madeline close, mindful of the baby between them. "Happy?" he asked softly, a question he still posed occasionally, as though ensuring the life they had built together continued to fulfill her. "Completely," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him lightly. "Go check your calves, rancher. We'll be here when you get back." The sound of an approaching wagon drew their attention. Charlie and Pedro were indeed returning from town, but they were not alone. A third figure sat between them, a woman in a plain, dark dress, her face shadowed by a bonnet. "Wonder who that is," Yates murmured, stepping to the edge of the porch as the wagon pulled up. Charlie jumped down first, his expression unusually serious. "Mrs. Abernathy, there's someone here asking for you. Says she's come a long way." The woman climbed down carefully, then looked up at the porch. She was older, perhaps in her 50s, with silver threading through her dark hair and lines of weariness etched around her eyes. "Madeline Rose?" she asked hesitantly. "Though I suppose it's Abernathy now." Madeline frowned slightly, not recognizing the woman. "Yes, I'm Madeline Abernathy." "How can I help you?" The woman twisted her hands nervously. "My name is Eleanor Wilson. I believe you worked for my sister and her husband some years ago in Silver Springs." Madeline tensed, memories of accusations and suspicion flooding back. Yates moved protectively closer to her side. "What do you want with my wife?" he asked, his tone civil but cautious. "To apologize," Mrs. Wilson said simply, "and to return something that belongs to her." From her pocket she withdrew a folded piece of paper. "This is a letter from my sister, written on her deathbed last month. She confessed something I think you should know." With trembling hands, Madeline passed James to Yates and accepted the letter. As she unfolded it, she recognized the elegant script of Mrs. Wilson, the woman who had once accused her of theft and deception. "Dear Miss Rose," the letter began, "by the time you read this, I will have passed from this world. The doctors say my heart is failing, and I find myself compelled to right a grievous wrong before I meet my Maker." Madeline's eyes widened as she continued reading. "The silver candlesticks in my husband's watch were never stolen. I hid them myself, intending to sell them to cover gambling debts my husband knew nothing about. When he discovered the items missing, it was easier to blame you, a young woman with no defenders, than to confess my own wrongdoing. Over the years, as I've heard of your happiness and success, my guilt has grown. I cannot die with this sin unconfessed. I ask not for forgiveness, which I do not deserve, but only that you know the truth. You were innocent of any wrongdoing in my household." The letter was signed simply, "Margaret Wilson," with a date just 3 weeks earlier. Madeline looked up from the paper, stunned. After all these years, vindication had come in the most unexpected way. "She made me promise to deliver it personally," Eleanor explained, "and to give you these." From her bag she produced a small package wrapped in cloth. Unwrapping it, Madeline found a pair of silver earrings. "These were my mother's," she whispered, recognition dawning. "I thought I had lost them during my travels." "They were among my sister's things," Eleanor said, "with a note saying they should be returned to you. I believe she took them when you left to strengthen the appearance of your guilt." Yates's expression darkened at this additional evidence of the injustice done to his wife, but Madeline laid a gentle hand on his arm. "Thank you for bringing these," she said to Eleanor. "It means a great deal to have them back and to know the truth." Eleanor nodded, clearly relieved by Madeline's gracious response. "I should go. The stage back east leaves tomorrow, and I've imposed enough." "Nonsense," Madeline said firmly. "You've come all this way. At least stay for dinner and rest before your journey. We have plenty of room." The invitation, extended to the sister of the woman who had caused her so much pain, demonstrated the depth of Madeline's character, her capacity for forgiveness, and her refusal to perpetuate cycles of resentment. As they settled Eleanor in one of the guest rooms and prepared dinner, with Sarah helping by arranging flowers on the table, Yates pulled Madeline aside. "You amaze me," he said softly. "After everything they put you through, you still open our home to her." Madeline smiled, touching the silver earrings she now wore. "Holding on to anger would only poison our happiness. Besides, she's not responsible for her sister's actions, only her own, which so far seem honorable." Yates shook his head in wonder. "How did I get so fortunate as to marry such a wise woman?" "You saw hope where others saw hopelessness," she replied simply. "And in doing so, you gave me the greatest gift of all, the chance to become the person I was meant to be." Later that evening, after their guest had retired and the children were asleep, Yates and Madeline stood together on the porch, looking out over the ranch that had become the foundation of their life together. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Madeline asked, leaning against his solid warmth. "If you hadn't spoken up that day in town?" Yates considered this. "Sometimes. But I believe some things are meant to be, regardless of the path taken to reach them." He turned her gently to face him. "We were meant to find each other, Madeline, to build this life together." "Even with all the complications?" she teased. "The rumors, the accusations, the doubts?" "Especially with those," he replied seriously. "They tested us, forced us to decide what truly mattered, and we chose each other every time." Madeline's heart swelled with love for this man who had seen beyond her circumstances to the person she truly was. "We still choose each other," she whispered, "every day." "And we always will," Yates promised, sealing the words with a kiss that held all the tenderness, passion, and commitment that had defined their journey together. As they stood embraced in the moonlight, the AA ranch, spreading out around them a testament to dreams fulfilled and promises, kept Madeline reflected on the long road that had brought her here. From a frightened, homeless young woman to the beloved wife of Yates Abernathy, mother to their children, respected member of their community. They had weathered storms together, faced down those who sought to separate them, built something lasting and true in a harsh land that demanded strength and perseverance. And through it all, they had found in each other exactly what they needed. She, the security and love she had longed for, and he, the warmth and purpose that had been missing from his life. They said she was hopeless. He said she was his hope. And together they had created something neither could have imagined alone, a love strong enough to overcome any obstacle, a family bound by more than blood, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. As Yates led her back inside to their home, their children, their life together, Madeline knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just a place to belong, but the very essence of belonging itself in the arms of the man who had believed in her when no one else would. And that, she thought as she followed her husband up the stairs to their bedroom, was the greatest hope of all.